Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. On this channel, we talk about problems people face in their day-to-day lives. Let's start with a video. My dad, 52, met my mom, 48, when she taught swimming at their local swimming club, and my dad went there to drop his younger sibling off for swimming lessons. At first, my parents did not talk a lot until my mom found out my dad was into swimming as well. I remember one time my mom had told me how she remembers that she didn't even realize how the conversation between my dad and her left the topic of swimming and switched onto something else when they first spoke. It was with that much ease that they were able to get along. They started hanging out as friends as they found out more about each other's backgrounds and fell more in love with each other. My dad wanted someone that had a soft and gentle personality, someone who was caring of not only him but his family. And that's exactly how my mother was. She was studying to become a teacher at the local community college, and my dad was pursuing his master's in the field of business. My parents continued to go out for a couple of years, and my mother claimed that their relationship was nothing but beautiful. After that, they got engaged and married within the span of a year. My mom had also gotten pregnant with me at this point. My mom said life felt perfect at that point because everything seemed to work out so well. It felt almost like a dream to her because this is all she had ever wanted. Sadly, the state of the relationship between my dad and mom changed when she gave birth to me. My dad was an amazing and supportive parent at first. He would take my mom to all of her appointments, take good care of her, and make sure that she was looked after. This caring nature of his continued until about the time I was 1, because that is when he started picking arguments with my mom. He had started berating her for small things or small mistakes that she would make, till a point my mother started to cry herself to sleep every night. Their relationship continued to weaken as my dad started coming home less and less as each day passed by, and one night, through a drunken confession, my dad revealed to my mom that he no longer was in love with her. This shattered my mom's heart as she did everything she could for my dad. She tried to be the best version of herself for him, and this is what he gave her in return. This is when what my mom felt for my dad faded away. All her feelings of love and respect were just gone. They continued staying together for me, and honestly, they did an amazing job at it, as they never ever made me feel like something was wrong. Ever since I was a kid, I have engaged in one extracurricular or another, whether that be swimming, dancing, art, or singing. I have always stayed back at school, caught up in one of these activities, and as a result, did not see a lot of my parents, except for dinner time, where we all got together to talk over a nice warm meal. The little things, like my dad being busy over work during the weekends and my parents being distant, make sense only now, as during my childhood I thought these things existed in everyone's families. My parents continue to raise me together, all the while my dad continues going on his work trips. I used to think of my dad as a hard-working person because sometimes he would be on these trips during holidays such as Christmas and Thanksgiving too. Now that I look back at it, I think of myself as just a naive person who did not know much better. It felt like everything was thrown onto me all at once when my mother found out about her cancer diagnosis about 2 years ago. I still remember the day she revealed the news to me and my father. I instantly burst into tears as my dad quietly walked towards my mom to comfort her. My mother was immediately given the treatment that she needed. Seeing her condition after her treatment made my heart ache for her. But what she told me during that period is what made me feel even more bad for her. She revealed the relationship dynamic between her and my dad, how they haven't had a romantic relationship with each other since I was 1, and how they're technically only with each other for me. She told me that she wasn't going to tell me all of this, but figured I deserved to know, and she deserved to get one of her last wishes fulfilled, which was her wanting to move out of our family house and move into my grandparents' beach house. I helped her move out and lived with her throughout the period of her treatment, as I did not want to see any more of my dad. My dad called me multiple times to apologize and tell me how he had done all this for me. Hearing this sickened me as it felt like I was the cause of my parents' discomfort all these years. My mother at one point had even gotten better, but unfortunately, this didn't last long. My mother's cancer eventually came back, and even more aggressively. She decided to try taking her treatment once again, but it was of no help. And as much as it still hurts to type this, my mother passed away. I'm still grieving over this as it hasn't even been a month. And ever since her death, things seem to have gotten so much worse. After a week of my mom passing away, my grandparents sat me down to inform me that the house they had gifted my mom had been left under my name. She has also left all of her other inheritance that my grandparents left for her under my name. This was extremely shocking to hear, as I did not know that my grandparents were going to leave so much for me as well as for her, considering the fact that my mother claimed that their relationship had always been sour. I wasn't in the condition to ask too many questions, so I decided to accept what they had said and leave, and my grandparents informed me that they would always be there for me. I was still living in the same beach house my mom was living at during her cancer treatment. At that point, just living there made me upset, and I think my dad had observed that whenever I would visit our family home where he still lived. At that point, I had also started the process to move into the house my grandparents had left for my mother, along with my dad. We were in the process of moving, which was put into a halt as during one of my visits to my dad, he sat me down and handed me a ticket to Hawaii. He said he booked this flight as he saw how stressed I was and told me that I needed a break to distress myself, and although I regret this terribly now, I took him up on it as I thought a vacation would make my grief go away. This is where I also made the biggest mistake I would. I handed my dad the keys to my mother's house and off to the trip I went. I had spent about a week in Hawaii. I was supposed to stay here for about 2 weeks, but for some reason, I did not feel good enough to continue my trip, so I decided to come home. When I came back, I decided to visit my dad's house, the shared home. First to thank my dad for the trip, but surprisingly, my dad's house was completely empty. He had finished moving houses within a week, and it was quite shocking, but I figured that he must have gotten some help from his friends. I decided to drive myself to my mother's house as that is where I would find my dad, and I did. I was greeted by my dad, who told me he wanted me to meet someone. I figured it was a friend who had come to visit, but I was so wrong. I walked inside and was instantly suspicious by the difference in the way the house was decorated. He walked me into the kitchen where I was greeted by a woman and 2 children who were of the age 14, 16. My dad sat me down as he poured me a glass of juice and started introducing me to these new people. He started off by saying that he's waited all his life to do this, and he is so happy that he finally can. He excitedly started introducing me to my stepmom and my stepbrothers, who gave me a fake smile. I was confused as I could not figure out what was happening. I was quiet throughout the whole ordeal my dad was going through, listening to what he had to say. This man had the audacity to finish talking by saying that he was hoping that I would be okay to move back to my mother's beach house, and this is where I blew up at him. I had tried my best to stay calm and have a mature conversation with my dad, but this man had the audacity to kick me out of my own house. I wasn't going to tolerate any of this. I told him that he needed to get out of this house, and there was no way I would let him play happy family in my mother's house. My dad tried to convince me to calm down, but I continued blowing up at him. This enraged my dad's new wife, and she started yelling at me, telling me that I am just like my mom, and it is of no wonder why my dad prefers his new family over me and my dead mom. I knew I had to physically restrain myself because if I didn't, I would have punched her in the face. I tell my dad, who is standing there quietly hearing our conversation, that if I don't find them gone within the next few days, I'll be calling the cops. He tries to talk to me again, and I inform him that I do not want to hear a word from him again. He just ends the conversation by telling me that he is disappointed in me. I'm currently at my friend's house talking to her about this, and she tells me that although my dad is wrong, it is also my mom's fault for not informing me of anything before, and the fact that my parents had a dead relationship sort of gave him the right to have a relationship with someone else. This made me upset, but I am also trying to wrap my head around this idea. I would like some clarity and opinion as to what I should do in this situation. AITA for getting mad at my dad who wants to kick me out of my own house to play happy family with his affair partner? I decided to visit my maternal grandparents to know if they had any clue about this situation. I knew they wanted to talk to me about something when I visited them regarding the house. So I go and meet them, and it turns out they're pretty good people. At least not as bad as my parents made them out to be. When we met, we talked about things here and there before I built up the courage to ask them questions about my mother and their relationship and why it had suffered till a point that they only spoke occasionally. I thought this would make my grandparents mad, but they were surprisingly very calm about it. They explained to me that their relationship was already poor due to the fact that my grandparents were distant with each other. This made my mom distance herself from them as she grew older. Their relationship suffered furthermore as they did not accept my parents' relationship. I asked them more questions about this, and they explained to me that they were against my mom's relationship with my dad because they had observed how much he had tried changing her. He ignored the strong, independent women that were behind her and saw her as a submissive, compliant, and malleable person. Their relationship was completely destroyed when my father poisoned my mother against my grandparents when he realized that they were a threat to his relationship with my mom. My grandparents also suspected that my dad was after my grandparents' money, as he came from a middle-class background. Hearing all of this made sense because when I started seeing things from the perspective of what my grandparents had told me, there were instances where my dad had actually followed a pattern where he depicted this kind of behavior. My grandparents continued talking as they explained that the relationship between them and my mom had gotten much better when she turned to them for emotional support when my dad had turned his back on her after I was born. My grandparents continued to support her, even encouraging her to divorce my dad, but she refused. It was only during her cancer diagnosis that she wished she needed to be away from my dad during her last few days. I felt myself getting more and more vulnerable towards my grandparents as I saw they were nothing but a victim of my dad's actions. I decided I could trust my grandparents enough to open up to them about my dad, and so I did. I told them everything that had gone down, and my grandparents told me that they had known about my dad's affair all along. My mom knew too, but she never told me, even during her last days, as she did not want to stain the little bit of respect I had for my dad. My grandparents told me that they were always here for me and that I didn't need to worry about my dad as they were pretty sure he would leave after the threat I had made. If not, they were always here for me to take care of the situation. I thanked them and left. This information is a lot for me to take in, as I did not know that this was the depth of evil my dad could go for his selfishness. Here, my mom had tried all her life to keep my dad's name under good light, but my dad did nothing, as his new wife said. What not about her? About 5 days have passed, and I decided to pay a visit to my mother's house today to see if my dad has left with his family. And to my utter shock, I was greeted by his wife, who seemed like she was arranging the house. Her reaction changed instantly as she saw me at the door and asked me what I wanted. The audacity of this woman to ask me what I wanted while she lived on my property for free made me laugh as I told her that I needed to see my dad. She told me that he wasn't home, and I told her that I would come back later. She asked me why I was doing all this when my dad had done so much for me. She continued to tell me how she and I both knew how hard my dad had worked to build this house. This is when I snapped and told her that it wasn't my dad's house but my mom's. The look she gave confirmed to me that my dad had lied to her, and I just laughed because at this point, this wasn't surprising to me at all, so I just laughed. I know my dad returned home in the evening, and I had decided enough was enough. I decided to meet up with my grandparents' lawyer, who informed me of all the options I had. I could either file a police report or send a legal notice to my dad. I decided to call the cops on my dad and file a report. The cops informed me that they visited my dad to inquire about the house, and that was enough to scare him and his wife. The cops threatened my dad with the fact that I could technically sue them for illegal possession of property. This worried my dad, as he has been going through a tough patch financially, so he would rather move than pay all his money away in legal fees. My dad and his family are set to leave the house this week. The cops said they would make sure that my dad had vacated the property on time. I feel quite relieved after knowing this and have a good feeling about moving into this house without any toxic energy. Thank you all for your help. NTA, your dad seems like an entitled person who only wanted to be with your mother until she fell pregnant. He continued staying with her probably because of family pressure. Your mom should have kicked him to the curb right at the moment she found out about his affair. I'm sorry about your mom. OP, take care. I'm a 29-year-old guy and have been with my girlfriend, who is 28, for 4 years. We've discussed marriage in the past, and it's something we were both interested in, so we knew it was on the cards in the future for us. While at her grandparents' for the family Christmas dinner a while back, I saw some old pictures. Among them was her grandmother when she was younger with a beautiful ring. I learned it was a family ring the relative had sold to buy drugs, and they were never able to get it back. My girlfriend commented how she'd looked forward to inheriting the ring when she was older, and the family lamented the loss. In private, I actually asked her grandmother if I could borrow one of the pictures, as it gave me an idea. I got a custom engagement ring made as close to the picture as possible. There are small differences, but beyond that, it's very close. It was a little more expensive than I'd been originally planning to spend, but I thought it was a nice gesture and the perfect ring all in all. When I proposed with it, my girlfriend was shocked, thinking I'd tracked down a ring that looked similar, and happy until I explained that no, I'd had it made. Then she got upset with me. She was of the opinion if I was going to get a custom ring made, I should have had her help design it, so it was to her exact taste. I pointed out that she'd said she'd wanted to inherit the ring, and I thought it was a good gesture and a way of bringing the ring back into her family. She disagreed, stating it's not the same ring, it doesn't hold the same sentiment, and I should return it to get a new custom ring. Obviously, I can't do that. It's a custom ring, which means there are no refunds, which is upsetting her. I wanted to surprise her with a gesture that I thought would mean a lot, but it backfired. I'm a bit upset that she was happy with the ring until she learned it was a custom ring. We're not yet engaged, as the proposal kind of backfired, as you can all see. AITA for doing this? There was no backfire. This worked out perfectly. You were able to see her true colors before the marriage. Run, buddy. Run fast.